Mr. Adel Hamaizia. Mr. Adel is the Managing Director of Highbridge Advisory, a strategic boutique advisory focused on information advantage, risk mitigation, policy development, and implementation for companies and governments working in the Middle East, the Balkans, and Africa. Adel is currently a research fellow at the Belfer Center's Middle East Initiative at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's also an associate at Global Partners Governance and was formerly an associate fellow at the Chatham House MENA program. He has consulted for several governments, foundations, and private sector organizations with a focus on political risk, due diligence, corporate investigations, public diplomacy, and economic development. He provided commentary for several media outlets, including the New York Times, the Financial Times, The Economist, the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, Arab News, The National, and Al Jazeera. Low on that list. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Adel to the stage.
Well, Assalamu alaikum, bonjour, good morning everybody. Thank you so much for being with us on a Sunday morning. I know you were here initially for Ambassador Zula and Dr. Chahed, but I'm pleased to have you and thanks for staying on. The idea for this conversation is really thinking sort of big picture around leadership in practice, what governance looks like, the contours of governance in our region. And to that end, I'd also like to thank, of course, Ahmed and Jamal for all of their hard work and their team for putting together this fantastic meeting at this depressing, disturbing, developing time. We are asset stripped in terms of how much time we have allocated, which is fine. I won't hold that against Ahmed or Jamal. But what we're going to do is have a bit of more of an informal, candid, coffee-style conversation. So we're not going to do the lining up for mics. So if you'd like to say something, please feel free to interrupt within sort of, what do they call it, Schumpeterian creative destruction. So you just put your hand up and a mic will come to you, even as we're speaking. Marhaba, bienvenue, willkommen. So when we think about the Arab world, yesterday I attended the media session. Of course, we were just here with Ambassador Zulman. Was anybody here for the startup ecosystem session? Any thoughts? You could shout out one word on startups, please. One word. On the startup session.
GCC.
Okay, that's fine. So the reason I asked that is it's almost surreal. Our region is 5% of the global population. Prior to Gaza, we were 58% of the world's responsible for 58% of the world's refugees and 68% of IDPs and refugees, right? Having said that, you cross the way in the GCC, you're talking about $4 trillion of sovereign wealth. So sometimes I think even using the word Arab is almost a misnomer when you talk about cooperation and collective, at least at state level, of course not individuals, humans, and people to people. Within this sort of leadership and governance toolkit, we've seen in our region we've got everything from repression, rent, redistribution, reform, religion. In my country of origin, I'm British Algerian, full disclosure. We're really talking about revolution as well. And one thing I'd like to sort of put out there, all of our countries are yearning and searching for the same things. That's cooperation, coordination, comparative advantage, competitiveness. But unfortunately, a lot of our regional cooperation is underwritten by conflict and a lack of consensus, which is unfortunate, often coercion, both internal and external. I'm delighted that we have with us somebody who was the youngest head of a bright spark in the region. I don't know if it's a discussion in progress or the end of the story. Allahu A'lam, we'll come back to that. But I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Youssef Chahed, who is the youngest, like I said, youngest head of government in our region. He was the Secretary of Fisheries in Tunisia, as well as the Prime Minister. He was also Minister of Local Affairs, also Senior Fellow at the Belfer Center at Harvard Kennedy School, and somebody who I've grown to call a friend. So I'm delighted that we're going to have a sort of small to and fro. I think Youssef has asked me to maybe chime in on the GCC for sort of a broader discussion that is aligned with our title this morning. I just wanted to jump right in. Dr. Chahed, we came out of COVID, we had what we call a poly crisis, right? COVID, Russia, Ukraine, now Gaza, food insecurity rather, evolving out of the Arab Spring, this tale of two cities. It's indeed the best of times and worst of times. Charles Dickens was lived at the top of my road in my thinking about diagnosis, what are the key challenges that our region are thinking, sort of grappling with today, both governance and otherwise, to your mind?
Thank you, Adel, and thanks for the organizer for the invitation. I'm deeply honored to be with you today. We have all these well-known challenges, but I think, as you mentioned, the international crisis, like the war in Ukraine, the COVID, the war in Gaza, all this created, of course, new challenges, such as political instability, food crisis after the war in Ukraine in many MENA regions. Also, debt increase. Of course, again, now I should be, and we should be very careful in talking about the MENA. There's not any, there's huge differences now between MENA countries, between oil and non-oil, and even with oil countries, there are differences between North Africa and the Gulf countries. So the MENA region is really different in terms of, there's no single MENA region like probably before. We used to talk about one MENA single region. So the differences, again, anytime we speak, we should really be careful about that. So I think, as I told you, this international crisis created new challenges, food crisis after the war in Ukraine, political instability, the debt increased a lot in many countries, like Tunisia, like Jordan, like Lebanon, like Morocco, etc. But then, if we go to the known challenges, of course, there are a lot of challenges, as you know, but if there is one that I can think about is job creation and youth employment. This is one of the biggest challenges for the next 20 or 30 years. According to the World Bank, there will be 300 million persons looking for jobs by 2050 in the MENA region. And then, if you know that the public service is saturated, this will put a huge pressure on governments, huge pressure on the labor market, especially with the demographic of the region. The fertility rate is still high. So this will open for new challenges, such as how to make our economy more attractive for foreign direct investments, how to reduce barriers to trade, how to integrate our economy in the international value chains, how to integrate our economy. For example, the North African, we can talk about that later, there is no integration. So we need to address informal economy, inclusive, how to make the growth more inclusive, because women are not participating enough in the economy, also the youth. So I think job creation, youth employment, since the region is facing one of the highest rates in the world in terms of youth employment, we're talking about 35–45% in several countries of the MENA region. So, of course, social inequalities, wealth redistribution also is very important, because in many of these countries you can find a divide between the East and the West, between social classes, so this also is very important. If you go back to the Arab Spring, I think the Arab Spring was more a call for social redistribution and more social justice, probably, than more for democracy or anything else. So I think job creation should be our top priority as a challenge for the next coming years.
So when thinking about job creation, you implicitly refer to this public sector addiction and these diminishing returns we've reached, right? So if you're talking about populations, when Mubarak came in and left, Egypt doubled in population. Saudi Arabia, between the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War, doubled in population. Algeria, with its own revolution, which started in the late 80s, doubled in population by the time of the HAAA. So it's really this sort of private sector absence, the development of this independent private sector to create these jobs which we're sort of yearning for, and we can come back to that. Dr. Chahed, many of us who look at political science readings, theories, they're cute, right? They're nice. How do you reconcile theory and practice? So you came from, if I can say, a country of constraints and not the largesse of some of the other wealthier states in the region. You turn up as Prime Minister of this country that everybody was banking on, or many people in Europe at least, or at least that was the narrative. Democracy, development, and all of that good stuff. You arrive, premier jour, first day. What are you grappling with? What are your key challenges? How does one, where does reality and theory encounter friction?
Yeah, thank you for this very important question. Of course, when you arrive, I think first you need to have a vision for a country. As political leader or future political leader, you need to have a vision. it's very important to have a vision. And then, you know, you think about what type of leadership can you implement, can you exercise. You need to motivate your team. You need to share your vision. You need to connect people to your vision. This is very difficult now, especially with all this new media environment, fake news, etc. So, but then, of course, this is the theory. But in practice, you will find. I'm not sure, but you will find the timing, the space, the funding to put your vision in place. Because you will find a lot of obstacles. You will find resistance to change. You will find the lobbies, you will find unions that prevent you from driving this change. So this is very important. You will also face unpredictable, natural disasters, terrorism acts, everything that can distract you from moving to realize your vision. So you need to take care about that. So communication also is very important because today we're living in a world of communication. So sometimes in the governments you don't have the same speed than the social networks, than the fake news, than to how to make people connect to your vision. So you need to have a strong communication policy, and sometimes governments are not ready to that. So you should have the theoretical background, but then of course you will find, in the reality you will find several obstacles to realize that, but you should keep and continue. You should evaluate good, you should do a good assessment of the strength, and the politics is a balance of power. So you should really evaluate well the environment in which you are in terms of strength and weaknesses.
So give us an example. So you walk into your office, what would be the first thing you do on a Tuesday morning in 2016?
So yeah, again, this is specific to Tunisia as a non-oil country. We have fiscal stress, so we don't have enough natural resources. So the first thing that you do, especially this is really specific to our country, you should pay salaries. You should think how you pay. We have a big public service. After the revolution, there was a huge increase in the number of people hired in order to contain the social pressure after the Arab Spring. So we have a very high wage bill to pay every month. Unfortunately, you should pay these salaries, the public transfer. Then you have to reimburse your debt. You remember that Lebanon went in this situation after the Prime Minister announced that in April 2020 that Lebanon is not able to pay $1.2 billion debt. So paying your debt is very important. So the most important indicator for many countries is the foreign currency reserves. Because with those foreign currencies, you buy oil, you buy medicines, you buy wheat, you buy semolina, etc. As we are a big consumer of these commodities. So the level of foreign currency is very important. The commercial deficit is very important for many countries. Of course, then you have to check everything about the production. You keep the production in a good level. Also, many of these countries are agricultural countries, so the level of dams is very important to follow, and rainfall is very important. But then, talking about that, you can see that public investment is not yet here. So if you look to your budget, you should have to pay salaries, you have to reimburse your debt, you have to pay subsidies for food, because many MENA countries are giving subsidies to food commodities in order to keep the prices low. So once you spend all this budget, you can see that there is not enough budget for public transportation, for healthcare, for education, and people can feel that there is a deterioration of public services in many countries of the MENA region. Again, I'm talking for a non-oil country, and it can be the same for other oil countries, but it's totally different. I'm talking about Tunisia. It can be different for other countries, of course. And yeah, probably let me ask you about the country that you lived in, Saudi Arabia, and you worked for the 2030 vision. So tell us about where we stand right now, and what are the achievements, what are the challenges, and I'm sure it's totally different from what was done.
Absolutely, thank you, Dr. Chahed. I'll jump into, I put together just a couple of picture slides for us to give a mini case study of the largest economy in the region. But just for a show of hands, Tunisia was the poster child in the region for democracy, right? Who thinks in this room right now, this amphitheatre, on a Sunday morning, 21st of April, who thinks that democracy is the right mode of governance for the Arab region at large? Of course, we're not talking about monarchies right now. Show of hands, who thinks that it still is? So, unless we've got apathetics in the room, we've only got around, I'd say, 10%. Who thinks that a different form of governance is required for the region? We don't want to put a name on it. So a little bit more than the Democrats in the room. It's interesting sitting in the United States of America. I'm going to sort of jump through a couple of things on this thing here. But before I do that, I just wanted to refer to another Tunisian. So we heard about this sort of private sector absence, this underdevelopment of a private sector, which for me and colleagues is really the largest what we call collective action issue in the Middle East and North Africa today, outside of course, conflict, which inshallah will be solved short term. But in terms of those longer term, structural, long durée issues, we're really talking about the absence of a private sector. Why do you have an absence of a development of an independent private sector? Lack of regional commons, and because of the politics stupid, right? So on the politics side, Ibn Khaldun, that's who I was referring to, once said that strong merchants shall eventually surpass the power of their rulers, which implicitly suggests, this was in Muqaddimah, this implicitly suggests that a strong merchant class would of course assert the leadership, which means you have to maintain what we call a rent-seeking, dependent private sector, right? So we don't even have a private sector worthy of the name. And this is really what we need in our region. From Nouakchott to Shatt al-Arab, every single MENA Arab country has access to coastline. We've always been fragmented by man-made issues, policy and history. Whereas our brothers in subcontinent Africa, it's often been ethnicity and geography. I'll sort of rush through this, but all I'll say is the following. This bottle of water, for several decades in Saudi Arabia, the largest economy in our region, which has supported the rest of the region. Many people in here who disagree with GCC foreign policies, I can smell it in the air from previous sessions. But in terms of this regional rentierism, the GCC from Kuwait with Algeria to Tunisia have played a very significant role, and there are dependencies and codependencies, but not in a productive sense, right? Which goes back to that earlier point. With Saudi Arabia, I'm going to hop, skip, and jump through this, but we're really talking about a country which was underwritten by a mode of governance, think a pyramid. Al-Saud, merchant elite, or the ulama, or the religious scholars, right? This gentleman in 2015 consolidated at the top, or at least quashed the merchant elite, and the religious clergy do no longer have the same power, banking on this shabab or youth, right? But in order to keep all of these young ladies and gentlemen on side, of course, you have to deliver jobs worthy of the name. Vision 2030 came through this sort of constellation of challenges. We had a Yemen situation, a JCPOA situation, a growing demography situation. We had a growing consumption of energy, and that's really what really drove this. And the reason why I picked up this bottle before is into the 2000s, a lot of those that led Saudi Arabia were their sort of thinking, their strategy, their policy planning was underwritten by this idea that you'd always have a $100 oil barrel on a forwards market, and that this would be more expensive, that oil would be more expensive than this thing. Married with that, you had octogenarians in the last 10 to 15% of their lives who, to try and push the sorts of changes Dr. Chahed was referring to, the benefits of that wouldn't be accrued to them, wouldn't be accrued to the king thereafter, but probably the king after next. So it's very difficult to make a case for change in that environment, right? Having said that, we ended up with a sort of low oil price environment in 2014. That ascended to this sort of new leadership, King Salman and of course Deputy Crown Prince MBS, and they came up with this thing. In the past, these sort of 5-year plans were relegated to ministry lockers from the likes of McKinsey. Many of you will go and work for these companies, but they were sort of relegated in the locker somewhere in the Ministry of Economy usually and Planning. This was a whole of government approach from the top, and the idea was really to embrace diversification. Like the Soviets, it's very difficult to do economics without politics. This is more about economic and social reform and less about politics. What representation 50 Shades of, that's a discussion for everybody to think about. But this is what they want to do. 30 million annual Umrah visitors, bring down unemployment, increase female labor force participation, which they've done very well. But FDI still very weak, which is necessary to transform an economy. Private sector development, very weak still. But they have done some incredible reforms. This is just a sort of broader picture about some of the baseline of 2016 and where we are today. So as you can see, the FDI inflows, incredibly weak. Private sector share, modest. But we've had increases in life expectancy, home ownership, etc. The big question will be if they can develop a tourism sector, which is labor intensive, while having to pay wages at a Saudi level, not an Egyptian, Algerian, Moroccan, Filipino, or Indonesian level. That's sort of just a very brief rundown, and I just want to sort of put out there the sorts of things that people have to think. We have a two-finger interjection. Please, if we can get the mic over, and I'm going to come back to Dr. Chahed. Name, if you could just give us your name and country, that would be great as well.
Yes, hi, thank you so much. My name is Dina. I'm Egyptian, but I'm from New York. I wanted to ask if you think a lot of these reforms are reactive or more on the proactive side. I think this is something that we've seen across the board really in a lot of our Middle Eastern countries. Is this a response to a move towards EV and, you know, we're reacting to this? Or is Saudi and a lot of other countries in the Middle East being proactive for a better future for our region?
Absolutely, so I'm sure Dr. Chahed has comments. In terms of the social side of things, I think there was pent-up reform. I mean, it was a normal situation where women had to be given licenses to travel or to drive, right? So that pent-up reform was a relatively quick win. When it comes to the energy transition, of course, if the energy transition hourglass is tick-tocking, or at least the sand, to use a desert metaphor, is slipping away, then of course, the quicker you get this private sector and start creating these jobs that Dr. Chahed speaks of, the better for your economic and political existence, right? And this goes back to that subsidy point, which is they could see that they were crowding out exports because they were consuming too much at home. Think subsidies, think water subsidies, energy subsidies. And what we've seen with subsidies, they're regressive and they engender waste, tabdir, and so on and so forth. But unless you had anything, I wanted to sort of bring it back to you and sort of think big picture about like that, you know, the Arab region. What are the sort of big policy reforms and opportunities that we can sort of grab?
I mean also, thank you for this important question. You know, we know all about the reforms that we need to do in the Arab world. It's not I mean, we know the challenges, as I mentioned, for many years now. What prevents us to implement these reforms, and what prevents us to turn these reforms or these challenges into opportunities? I believe it is a problem of internal deficit of governance. It is a problem of leadership. And I think that Saudi Arabia now, there's a new leadership. There is strong leadership that is trying to move things in different directions. But globally speaking, in many MENA countries, it is a problem of domestic internal governance, weak institutions, because of poor management, because of corruption, because of a lack of accountability. There is a lack of trust of citizens in their state because of nepotism, because of clientelism. There is a low inclusiveness of women and youth, etc., in the economic and the public debate. So I think it's all about leadership, and it's very important that you trained here in the US and in the Western good universities. One day you go back to your country, and it is the responsibility of your countries to try to look after you in order to attract you back. We have really a problem of leadership in our country. I'm not talking about the leadership in terms of government or a prime minister or ministers. You need an enabling environment, you know. There are very important, I remember that in the government we try to identify very important positions, that we need strong leaders to drive the change, to face all those obstacles. It's not only about technical leadership, it's also adaptive leadership in our countries in order to make the things moving. So I think, of course, education is key, etc., but we need to have good leaders. It's a very big problem of lack of governance and leadership it's not only financial problem. Sometimes look all to the international donors, look to the rate of absorption of money with the World Bank or with other donors in the MENA region. It is less than 30 or 40%. Means that we have the money, but we cannot implement reforms and projects because of lack of leadership.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that's been an enemy of policy making and good planning is data poverty in our region, right? And that's something that we hope these digital divides and dividends will be addressed. We have a question or comment at the front. Oh, sorry, please.
Thanks so much for being here.
Name and country.
Sure. And country. Tanya from Lebanon. I'm super excited for the GCC, but at the same time, there are very special cases of near perfect centralized governments, which we cannot, of course, undermine, and of course, almost unlimited resources. So this is not the case of most other countries in the MENA region, and that's why I'm so grateful that you're here representing Tunisia. I think there is, maybe in the case of Lebanon as well, we speak about maybe the heritage of French institutions from, like, the colonial period and the incredible bureaucracy. And while we're talking about, like, the Lebanese cautionary tale of, like, the complete collapse of the public sector and what that's had on trust in central banks and whatnot. My question is, how, there have been a lot of IMF talks about the restructuring of the public sector, freezing employment and trying to restructure, if there is a huge wage premium on public sector jobs in the Middle East, and what have you encountered as, like, what are possible solutions, what have been the roadblocks, within sort of that colonial structure that's been set there, incredible job security, very hard to move people. You freeze them, they're not working. What are your solutions? What have been the roadblocks? Second question, you don't have to answer. Where is the Arab League, and why has this coalition not done anything? And, like, where do you see it possibly playing a role in the future? Thank you.
The second question I know was a joke, but the first question we'll try and address. Dr. Chahed, did you want to?
Yes, I mean, you are right. The public service is saturated in all our countries, so the only solution needs to come from the private sector. We can have good private sector. In Tunisia, we have a very good dynamic private sector. So the government needs to create a good environment, need to reduce barriers to trade and to how can we attract foreign direct investment if we should work more our legislative, our attractiveness for foreign direct investment, our logistical ports, etc., airports, like many countries in the Gulf, like UAE, like the Saudi are doing. So I think the private sector, the youth can be also solutions, not a problem. We should turn this. I mean, our countries are mainly young countries. So, and we see many examples where government is offering a good environment for the youth. I remember in Tunisia we did this startup act to help young people in order to export their services and create those startups. It was very successful, and we have very good examples. So if the government really focuses on this, we can create a good environment. We should change the mentalities. If you ask people in our world, most of them would like to work in the public service, which is, of course, there's a lot of entrepreneurship, and this also goes back to education. So entrepreneurship, I think we should change this mindset in order to explain to this young generation that the public service is saturated. We should learn how to create an entrepreneurship environment and how to offer them tools in order to create things. And this is possible. We have very many successful stories in our world.
Absolutely. We actually have a gentleman from Yemen, Hadramut, in the front row. And when you think about cultural amnesia when it comes to entrepreneurship, this was the archetypal entrepreneur, the Yemeni. And I think we suffer from this cultural amnesia in the region. And I think experimentation is necessary. So a little while ago, we actually approached the Iraqi government, which has the highest public sector wage bill on planet Earth as a percentage of GDP. And what we were sort of putting forward to them is to try and have almost entrepreneurship with stabilizers. Graduates coming into the workforce, you've got 1 or 2 years to go and flirt with business. It's sort of risk adjusted. If it doesn't work out, we'll bring you back in and bring down the pension, the retirement age. and sort of work out the sort of pension system. So there are things that can be done, but I think one thing that we're sort of missing from, I think, the conversation maybe in a future discussion is really half of our region, if not more, is in the informal sector. How taxation can be thought about, right? What's that old adage? 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing. You could have flat tax rates, 7-8%. Just bring those into the system so they exist. Bank accounts, upskilling, mentoring, training, integration into supply chain. There are opportunities there.
So here also there is a very good example. Is about I think if there is one area really where the Arab needs to invest is the digital transformation and new technologies. There is what we call in the Arab world the digital. So there is what we call in the Arab world the digital paradox. Means that we have all Facebook accounts, social networks. But if you look, for example, to the use of digital payment or money digital, it is very low. It is one of the lowest regions in the world. So I think this is what we call digital paradox. It's just an example. So I think we really have to invest in digital transformation. And again, you have big differences between countries within the MENA region, between UAE, Saudi Arabia, and North Africa. There are big differences, we have to say that. So I think digital transformation is very the best area where we should invest. We will win a lot of time, we'll open huge employment opportunities for the youth, and this will impact the GDP and the growth for all those nations. So yeah, I think this is one of the most important areas we should invest in.
And I think one of the discussions around inclusive versus exclusive growth is digitalization post-COVID. We saw these sort of laggards, leaders and laggards, and these, like I said, these haves, have-nots, these jabs and jab-nots, but it also spoke to the digital point. And with digitalization, you can improve social protection, which means you can better target and not offer subsidies to the wealthiest. So I think with digitalization, you have this force multiplier that we hope the infrastructure, even if it is Chinese and red and not American or European and blue, working together. We're going to be wrapping up soon, but we wanted to take a couple of questions. And before that, I just wanted to do one thing. Just a show of hands, a couple of big picture questions which will impact leadership, governance, and transitions. Who thinks that, show of hands, who thinks that Vision 2030 will score at least an A+, or call it B+, A by 2030, a show of hands? So we've got around 20% who believe so. Who thinks that Saudi Arabia will be normalizing relations with Israel, economics, politics, warts and all? I haven't even given you the time frame, you've all put your hand up. For the record, I was going to say within 2 years, but we already had around 70% up. Sorry?
Not without the Palestinians.
That was the follow-up question, right? The time frames matter, right? So 2 years, I think, is likely Biden or Trump, my personal opinion, but we can have this conversation outside. See, everybody gets even more awake when we ask these questions. And we now can ask that question. I'm going to put a 5-year time frame on it. Will Palestine be a full UN member state? Ports, airports, borders, etc. within the next 5 years. So about 10%.
With conditions.
An interesting discussion. We could come to that in a coffee. But we have a couple of last questions. Please, short, sweet, and then we'll try and cluster them and end.
Yeah, please limit your questions to just one question and make them brief. So we have a long queue, I think, starting with you and then
Difficult questions to Dr. Chahed.
I'll try my best. Hi everyone, thank you for the great panel. So my question here in the spirit of collaborative change, how can we as Arabs in the US or in the West in general give back to our communities and contribute to that development? Especially there's a lot of divide to conquer, there are some monopolies in our countries, so how can we tackle that? And also we may align on the vision. Yes, there is a need to tackle unemployment rates, right, debt and all of that, but we may defer on the execution.
So wanted to have just from your standpoint, what are the three main action items, like the immediate ones in each region? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll cluster them and then we'll just give a very quick feedback and carry on outside. Please.
الحسن الكاف من حضرموت واليمن السعيد. Thank you very much. We've mentioned the importance of the private sector. We've mentioned integrating MENA within international value chains. We've also mentioned the job creation challenge. Two questions. One, how do you react to a cross-MENA economic bloc to accelerate trade and investment? And let's even be bold, currency, let's think long term. So how do you react to a concept of an economic trade and investment bloc across MENA? I mean, we've got capital, we've got natural resources. So that's question one. Question two, do you believe economics can fix politics? At the end of the day, we do have a very fragmented political landscape across MENA. So question two, how do you react? Can economics fix politics? And is an economic trade and investment bloc a possible way to go? Thank you.
Thank you. Take one last point, does that work?
We'll take one more question.
Hi, thank you so much for this. So I actually grew up in Saudi Arabia, lived there for a little bit, and my question is a little bit on that side. If you read George Orwell's Animal Farm, there was a pig called Squeaky who would throw numbers at people all the time. And my question is, through my experience with Saudi Arabia and 2030 vision, how much of these numbers conceal the actual underlying relations between the government, a strong middle class, an industrial base rather than a resource base, from an actual top-down, throw money at the problem and hope it gets fixed, all these things. How likely is it to actually bring an authentic economic, political change into the people themselves, industrialized, institutionalized, etc.? Thank you.
Thanks very, very much. So we have, how do you give back MENA bloc, economics fixes politics, and Saudi Arabia? Would you like to start?
Yes, thank you for the questions are very difficult, as you mentioned. About the MENA bloc, of course, we have a good integration between the GCC countries, and at the same time, we have one of the lowest integration in the world, which is the Maghreb Union that never worked and that is broken from 1989. And by the way, this summer will be the
30th year of closed borders.
Yeah, the closed border with Tunisia and Morocco. So, of course, integration, there is a huge cost. The huge cost of the non-integration of the Maghreb countries. It's not only in terms of GDP, but also in terms of food security, in terms of energetic security, etc. So I think, yes, integration is very important, but then, now there is a huge differences between MENA countries. But I think in the midterm, there is a lot of common things or common challenges for all those countries. Economic diversification. Of course, oil will not flow forever, and the price will decline with the zero net commitment, carbon commitments, and renewable energy. So probably we should start to think in the next 30, 40 years from now, about the economic diversification, and we are not ready for that. The climate change also is impacting the region. Look what happened to the UAE last week. Look what happened in Libya and in Morocco in 2023. So I think there will be, this region also suffer from water scarcity, and this will create conflict and probably displacement of people. So climate change is impacting the region, and probably the awareness in the region is low. And then the demographic. Fertility rate is still high, as I mentioned, globally speaking, and this will create a huge pressure on the labor market. So I think there are topics where, despite the differences that we are seeing today, there are common topics for the midterm that can allow those MENA countries to come together and to probably can be step by step, the GCC, the North African Union, etc. Then we can do it in 2 or 3 steps. But as I told you, we are one of the lowest integrated region. The trade between the North African countries is less than 1 or 2% compared to the trade with Europe or other countries. So this is really an urgent matter that we should fix, and of course it is a political matter.
Absolutely. Just very few complementary points on that. On the first one, I think an action point, you are all very incredibly smart people with incredible access and networks. Select one person in the region to mentor. One single person. Don't say 10, 15, I'm going to do a company. Just one single person you give a couple of hours a month to. Not to sort of pat myself on the back. I've done this in Tunisia, and I've been amazed that you can go and sort of have a training workshop, forget sort of fancy stuff, just soft skills. So a lot of people in my part of the world, in the Maghreb, they don't know that it's meant to be, when you're applying to the Anglosphere, Adel Hamaizia, not Hamaizia Adel. They don't know that the cycle for applying for next year happens a year before. Real fundamentals that can have like serious impact. And sometimes for us, we take them for granted. So CV development, interview preparation, a lot of like fundamentals. And believe it or not, a lot of the guys that I've seen in Tunisia and Algeria at least have skills akin to what we see here in the US when it comes to those fundamentals, the hard skills, but not the soft. On MENA block, on the Maghreb point, sadly, least integrated region, if OCP, which is the national phosphate company in Morocco, and Sonatrach, the Algerian Aramco, came together, they'd be the largest fertilizer producer on planet Earth. Disaster. When we negotiate with the EU, they treat us as silos, so our bargaining power is compromised. So I take the point on MENA block, but plurilateral over big picture has to be the way. If you were to just open those borders between Algeria and Morocco, you'd have around 120 million people. Cairo to Casablanca, 230. The GCC, they've achieved a customs union, failed on the currency, but they have too many vision programs that are cannibalizing each other in the same sectors. So coordination is necessary, and cash is king. And then finally on economics fixed politics, this is a 10-year program that we need to discuss outside. I actually think that they work hand in hand, political economy. And then just on the Saudi point, absolutely. What we're seeing is more support for those at the bottom of the pyramid and benefits that accrue to the top, and this missing middle is a problem across the region. Missing middle-sized firms, missing middle class, and it requires citizen participation. I'm not saying it can be actually, that's fine. It doesn't have to be in maybe a Lebanese or a Tunisian framework. And then I think what you're going to see is more and more demands as rents per capita dwindle, and Saudis are going to be poorer in 10 years than they are today. The challenge for the other GCC states is a poorer Saudi Arabia is a problem for Qatar, Saudi, UAE, even with incredible GDP per capita. The average Saudi I've spoken to, we've done research on the ground, thinks that their GDP per capita is higher than somebody in Massachusetts. They're at like 30,000, or even sometimes less. Here it's around 73,000. Massive GDP is $600 billion. Saudi Arabia's is 900. So what citizens think can also be a challenge for the incumbents in terms of driving change. But for me, for all of some things I take challenge in terms of feedback loops, bandwidth, these things I think will come with time. And just the very fact that NEOM was scaled back recently tells us there are learning effects, which I think is actually a positive. It might harm investor confidence in the short term, but support Saudi development in the midterm. We'll end on a final question for you all before thanking our speaker and you, the audience. Do we think the Arab region is going to be a richer or a poorer state by 2030? As in, if you were to take the average Arab GDP per capita, what we call inflation adjusted, will we be in a better place than we are now? Better, hands up, worse, remain as is. Okay, so we've got half glass full, half empty. Excellent. Inshallah ya Rab. On that note, I'd like to thank Jamal and Ahmed and the team. Apologize to the session who were delayed after. Thank you. And Dr. Chahed, thank you so much for the engagement.